the introduction, which, yeah, so as Rich already introduced us, I'm Jonathan from Eastern Taiwan, and East does quite a lot of work on policy with the government. So we'd just like to share a bit about our experience here in Taiwan, and especially with the battery gauge review going on right now. So just a little bit of an introduction to East to start off with. As mentioned already, we're based in Taiwan. We're quite an old organization relative to many organizations in the movement right now. So we've been established for 20 years. And over the time, our focus has changed. So at the outset, we did work on farmed animals, including on humane slaughter, and we did key investigations on that. But we also did a lot of work on companion animals and other issues. And we still do, and we still work across a lot of issues. But now most of our focus at present is on farmed animals and animals used in research. And as an organization, I think a personal observation is that East takes a long-term focus and a long-term vision to issues, trying to address them at the core, and has focused on policy work for a very long time, since the outset. So these are just a few policy milestones that East has achieved. So an end to wild animal performances in circuses, ending the trade in seal products, particularly seal oil, achieving a ban on shark finning. And then this was prior to East's official formation, but many of the people who are in East now were very crucial to advocating for the enactment of the Animal Protection Act. But lots of other little things along the way. And in terms of laying hens, we have quite a bit of history since the EU first enacted its ban on laying hen battery cages in 2012. So I think around that time, East was starting to prepare for bringing this movement into Taiwan and trying to prepare the policy framework. So first, back in 2012, East launched an appeal for clear labeling that would allow consumers to choose clearly between the different eggs on the market. Then in 2014, we worked with the responsible authority who published official guidelines for alternative housing systems. So these kind of define what it is required to, what it means to be a cage-free system, whether it's free range or barn, and also for enriched cage systems. But these were just non-binding guidelines. And then in 2016, we passed an amendment to laws around food labeling, which required labeling for eggs that come from these alternative housing systems. And the eggs that had that labeling must meet the guidelines laid out in the previous that I just spoke about. So this then made those guidelines binding. So any egg that wants to call itself free range or barn must meet minimum space requirements and other equipment and enrichment requirements. And then again in 2016, we we worked with the government to push for low interest loans for farmers. So that means that farmers who want to make the transition to cage-free systems have a financial support that's lower than the market rate. And I just wanted to point out that policy making is going to be very different in different countries. It depends a lot on your political system, on the institutions of power, who the decision makers are. So I just wanted to point out a couple of points about Taiwan that might influence, whether good or bad, our experience of policy making, and that you can consider in your own country as well. So for those who don't know, Taiwan's a democratic society. That means there are elected officials and that public opinion has an important role to play in politics. It also means the government processes are relatively open to participation. There is a high degree of transparency, and the government will hold hearings and call in stakeholders. So there is the ability to be involved in that process. And I think something I've observed coming from Australia, especially, one difference is there is quite a high value placed on evidence by the authorities, and they do really respect the role of academics in the political process. Some things that make it difficult sometimes is, although improving, is that there's not always a really strong awareness of animal welfare issues among officials. And I think one thing that East has done over the last 20 years is educate officials on these issues so that they know what it means. Animal welfare, it's not just animal health, it's also about the well-being of the animal, and that they know that this is an issue internationally. I think that's important, so they can understand that this is a priority. Yeah, animal welfare isn't one of the main priority issues, is another point. So relative to other issues on the government's agenda, they might not make it the first thing in mind. They might not rush to change it or react. And another thing is just with a democratic society and that open process, there are many stakeholders involved, and that means you're competing with industry, you're competing with people with different viewpoints, and you have to make sure your argument and your persuasiveness stands out. So this is just a basic process of, I think, what the policy change process might look like from the perspective of an NGO. So you start out, you might be identifying which branch of government has the authority for this area. So you might have to look at the constitution or the allocation of powers. And this could be legislative bodies. It could be delegated to a government agency who is able to make this change. Or it could be even a city or state government, depending on how your country operates. Then the second step, within that structure, you have to look at what is the relevant law or regulation that governs this area. So maybe there's an existing animal protection law that you can amend. Maybe there are laws on animal slaughter. In Taiwan, we have the Animal Industry Act. It could be related to food safety and hygiene regulations. For example, the labeling laws I talked about earlier. So it really could be quite a broad range of regulations or laws that you're interacting in, and you have to identify which you should be targeting for your change. Or maybe you might need to introduce new law or regulation altogether. And then the third step is identifying how you'd like to change that. So you'll have to identify what the problem is and maybe draft a proposal of what your stance is and put that clearly into writing of how you would like to see this legislation or this regulation changed, so that other stakeholders or legislators or government agencies can see clearly what you're proposing and assess how that will impact society and other stakeholders. And then the final step is determining who can affect this change. So aside from who has official authority over this, there might be a whole network of people of influence who surround this ecosystem. I think viewing it as an ecosystem is helpful, and they're able to exert their pressure or their influence to help you reach this change. So that could be people like government officials, it could be legislators or city councillors, it could be the media or academics. And in Taiwan, we have quite a few state-owned research agencies which are set up to inform government policy and provide academic and technical guidance. So they play a really important role as well. And I just want to talk about in this presentation, because the battery cage review mainly focuses from the regulatory perspective. So it is able to be implemented by a government agency, the Council of Agriculture, as opposed to needing necessarily to change legislation and pass new laws. That we're going to focus mainly on the regulatory side of this for the time being for this presentation. So here are a few fundamentals for engaging in policy. I think these are pretty basic, but I think different to corporate outreach is sometimes corporate outreach, it's just about maybe reaching a few key stakeholders or those CEOs or directors at the top of the decision tree and making a persuasive case to them or pressuring them. But obviously government has to deal with industry, it has to deal with you know, all of the thousands of farmers or producers that are going to be affected by a change. They have to deal with the media, they have to deal with public opinion. So I think the policy development process looks a bit different and is sometimes more thorough than maybe achieving a corporate policy where a decision could theoretically be made quite quickly. So it's really important then to put forward well-evidenced and feasible ideas and show that you have done the research and whatnot to back up this case. It's important to be really attentive through the policy process. You have to really make sure that you're following up in the meetings, attending public hearings, and other stages of the process. And you have to work in good spirit with stakeholders. So there has to be a certain degree of trust. You have to be willing to compromise sometimes. You can't just put your foot down and say, we don't accept anything like this. It is a process where you're just one of a series of stakeholders in the room. And these are a few ingredients we've identified that are key for good policy work. So the first one is establishing your credibility as an organization. This is definitely something that East has done for a long time. So the Chinese name of East is actually like a research institution, if you translate it. And I think that underscores the emphasis that East puts on credibility and making sure you have evidence-based. You're not just being sensationalist, but you actually have a really sound basis to what you're saying, and that it is fact-based and not misleading. So I think that's something that East has built up over a very long time, and it's something that organizations should focus on if they wish to work with the government. Another part is forming relationships with decision makers. So I think we have a very interesting relationship with the government. We're often criticizing them, but at the same time, we need to have that trusting relationship with them. And they have a trust that while we're playing our role as an NGO and supervising the performance of the government, they know that we can act in good faith as well. Thirdly, I already went over this, but presenting a robust case for your change. It's good if you've done maybe research, you could have compiled a report, you could have sought feedback from academics or support from academics, and considered things from the government's perspective as well, so that you're really having a well-rounded and comprehensive case for why this should occur and why this will be a positive change for not just our own interests as an animal protection organization, but potentially for society as a whole. The fourth point was seizing the right timing for your campaign. So I'll touch a little bit more about this in a moment, but I think certainly you have to gauge the public atmosphere and keep a close track of what else is happening in society, so that you can seize the right timing for your campaign launch. And fifth is marshalling support for your cause. So this could be, as I already touched on, academics or other NGOs. It could be forming a coalition with other NGOs. It could be finding other creative supporters. So maybe you can find a company that's willing to come out and support your cause, or a think tank, or maybe a politician. So I think you have to find support wherever you can find it and wherever is relevant to the change you're trying to make. And of course the public as well, making sure you can bring the public along for the journey and demonstrate that there's public support for your issue. So these are just a few ways you can start out when you want to really launch your policy campaign. So a few things that we often start with is by doing a report, a study, or an analysis. So this really allows you to identify the problem. It's important for yourself for gaining an understanding of the issue, but it also allows you to really understand where the root cause is of the problem and present this to the public or the government in a meaningful way. Another one is unveiling an investigation. So if you have gone to a farm or uncovered some problems through an investigation, that's obviously a very effective way of showing that this problem is important to the public and to the government. Tapping into current affairs issues, other issues that are going on in the media right now, and trying to latch onto that for your campaign. And announcing submissions to a consultation process. So sometimes the government will conduct reviews of existing regulations or legislation, or they'll open a consultation process. And that's always a good window of opportunity to choose for your timing of your campaign. Another one is if you have a sufficient relationship that you've built up with decision makers, you could try it directly rather than going for a public method. You could try lobbying them directly. So I'm just going to give a few examples of campaigns that we've launched that kind of relate to those issues. So this one is about fish binding. So it might not be something that you've heard of before, but basically fish are bent into a U shape and tied from tail to the mouth with a nylon thread. And this is able to, at traditional markets or at wholesale markets, this means the fish, the gills are opened, which keeps the oxygen going through and supposedly keeps the fish fresher for longer. That's the justification that's used for this process, so that when the customer purchases the fish, it's still alive and fresh. Obviously, there's a lot of food safety problems with keeping fish alive and out for so long. And but for this issue, we conducted an investigation into the wet markets, and we conducted footage. We captured footage. We actually worked with Reanimals on this, so we were able to capture really strong and powerful footage that showed the suffering of these animals, and hold a press conference to publish this to the media and the public. Another one touching on the public issues that I mentioned earlier. So Taiwan recently announced that it would ease restrictions on US beef and pork imports to allow pork imports that have ractopamine, which is a type of growth promoter, into Taiwan. This had previously been not allowed for a long time. And this drug has adverse impacts on animal welfare. So this is a huge discussion in Taiwan at the moment because people are very concerned about food safety and feel like their food safety is being compromised by this decision for political purposes. So it's a really, really contentious decision. And because of that, we were able to join the public discourse and get more leverage for our campaigns because it's a really hot topic at the moment. And then just one last one is, in Taiwan, there's a health certification scheme. So health food products can be certified with a little logo mark from the government, which shows that, which is supposed to demonstrate that the product has health benefits. And a lot of these benefits go through animal testing. The testing for the efficacy of these products is done through animal testing. And so the government a few months ago announced that they were going to add a new certification for joint health claims. So claims that will claims that a product might help with your arthritis or other joint health issues. And they announced new animal tests as part of, that would happen as part of this process. And so as part of this, there was a consultation process, and East was able to make a formal submission. And we also announced that submission publicly via a press conference. And through that process, we were able to negotiate with the government, and they have backtracked on some of those and will remove some animal testing from the scheme. And these are some strategies that I actually spoke about with Wu Hong, who's been working in the policy area for a very long time. And these were some strategies that he suggested. So one is to definitely make sure you identify the root cause of your problem, be really clear what the barriers are, what is causing this issue. Sometimes there might be particular people or a particular law or a particular institutional culture or concern that is preventing progress. So it's really important to be clear on that. Before you go public with your ideas or make submissions, it's important to refine them, to challenge them internally, to have a rigorous debate, and also to put them to outsiders who might not share your view. And that way you'll be able to make sure that your idea and your proposal can stand up to oppositions. So it might be good to get feedback from academics, even have meetings with industry before putting out your formal proposal. A key one is to gain the upper hand by knowing more than anyone else on the issue. So I think everyone here probably agrees that information is often our most powerful tool. And if you're able to become the expert on this issue, to know more about it than anybody else, to know the scientific basis, to know other policy examples from overseas, to know precedents from your own country, to know what the public opinion is on this issue, then you've covered your bases and you can allow yourself to think ahead of the government and act ahead of the government. So you're already thinking of things that the government isn't thinking of, and that allowed you to take a leading role in the debate and lead the discussion. And one last one is to continue to assess the landscape as your issue evolves. So I think a lot of issues, they're not stagnant. As you, maybe after you've had your press conference or after you've publicized an issue, after you've attended stakeholder meetings, you might find new obstacles that you weren't aware of before or new opportunities. So it's really important to continue to reevaluate your strategy as you go through the process. And after you've launched your campaign for your policy proposal, these are a few tactics that can keep it on the government's agenda or help to exert pressure to make sure that action is followed through on. So you don't want your action just to be a proposal and then no follow-up action. It's important to keep it on the agenda and make sure the government knows it's important. So this could be demonstrating really strong support from the public. If you're able to leverage that, you can have a petition like this one pictured here. I know that in the EU recently, last year, they had the End the Cage Age petition with 1.6 million signatures. That's a really good way to show elected representatives that the public are really passionate about this issue, and that puts pressure on them. Obviously, they're elected to make sure that change happens. Also, if you have opinion polls that show really high support for your issue, that's really powerful as well. We already touched a lot on this, but if you have other influential voices that you can leverage, whether it's academics, an expert on this particular topic, a legislator, they are quite respected in Taiwan and have quite a lot of influence. You might be able to find a company that maybe is already committed to going cage-free and they're willing to put out a statement for you or make a submission to a government consultation. That could also be really effective because it shows that it's not only NGOs wanting change, but also the corporate sector or the market is also wanting policy certainty or policy change. Working with other NGOs, maybe it's environment NGOs, maybe you find food safety allies, and then opinion leaders as well. And then there are also some procedural tactics. And again, this goes back to being really aware of your own political system and understanding how change is made in that environment. So one thing that can happen in Taiwan is that legislators might hold a public hearing and they bring different stakeholders together, and this helps to give the issue more exposure and really can kickstart a more involved policy process. Another thing that legislators can do in Taiwan, because their role is to supervise the government agencies and the performance of the government agencies, is they're actually able to freeze or cut off parts of the agency budget. And so if you have a legislator that really supports your cause and is willing to take this to a committee and pass this measure, they can attach conditions. For example, they can say the government agency must produce a report on this issue, or they must do an analysis looking into this issue before the budget is unfrozen. So when that happens, the agencies will move really quickly to work on your problem. And I think another important thing it's important not to overlook is to commend progress when it happens. So one of the previous slides showed the Taiwan Food and Drug Administration after they removed some animal testing from the health food scheme. And we commended them on social media and asked people to write in and give them positive feedback. I think it's important that they hear, because elected officials or government officials will have a lot of negative complaints and negative feedback from people that are affected. It's really important to make sure they hear positive voices and they get positive reinforcement, so that they stick with your change and they're more willing to help next time around. And now I'll just give a brief overview of the battery cage review that is currently happening in Taiwan, and what that means, what the process has been so far, and what do we expect to come from this policy evaluation. So starting off with what it is, the policy review is a comprehensive evaluation of all of the factors that would be impacted by a ban on battery cages. So it includes we have an academic who is heading up the study, or the process, I should say. And beneath that process, there are a lot of sub-studies or analyses that are being done on different parts that will be impacted by a ban on battery cages. So this includes looking into the global cage-free trend and the movements of markets around the world, farm biosecurity and food safety management. So for example, what the different types of housing systems mean for food safety, salmonella, for controlling those risks, possible socio-economic effects. So what would a ban on battery cages mean for egg prices? How would this affect the industry? How would this be reflected in consumer purchasing of eggs, consumer prices? We'll also look at what changes to legal and regulatory frameworks would be needed to enact this change, and how this would interact with the whole ecosystems and laws and regulations. And finally, there'll be a census of egg producers. So a survey will be sent out to egg farmers to understand the equipment they're using, to understand the scale of their farms, to understand their attitudes towards transitioning to cage-free systems. So that's something we've worked with, and will be really comprehensive and provide information and insights that we've never had before about the state of the industry right now. And maybe similar to other countries in Asia, the industry is quite fragmented in Taiwan. So there's more than 1,000 farmers, lots of small farms. So I think previously it's been very hard to find such high level of data. So this is a really new opportunity for us. And what it is not, so the policy review process does not mean the government has decided to ban battery cages already. This is just a first stage in a process and an exploratory step at this stage, but something that we hope we can continue over a long period of time to lead to something more. So just a brief overview of the process. This is something that I found quite interesting in terms of how this came about. So as part of the Cage-Free Alliance, which Peng runs, we have a series of member farms, and we also hold technical training sessions to help improve the welfare of, to provide advice on animal nutrition, animal husbandry, as well as our membership processes and information about the Cage-Free Alliance. So this is pictured here is one of the technical training sessions. We also had a lot of people who were seeking to join the Alliance attend. And right at the very front there, the man in the purple shirt holding our standards, he's a high-ranking government official in charge of poultry at the Council of Agriculture. So he was also attending this session. And as a side note, I think this was a really great way of educating government officials as well, and showing like the demand within the industry. So if you can think of ways to convey to the government that there is change happening and let them see it with their own eyes, I think that's really important and impactful as well. But at this event, there was a kind of informal meeting held during the lunch break, and you can see that happening right here. And that's where really the roots of this policy proposal started to take place, coming forward with a proposal to really do more to promote better welfare in Taiwan's farms, and really the government to really start taking this seriously. And you can see we also have Marilyn Su from Carrefour Taiwan. We have representatives of East and the representatives of the government, as well as academics who are giving talks at this technical training workshop. So even though it was an informal meeting, we came prepared, and we had this idea of driving further change. So after this meeting where this initial idea was discussed, the Professor Chen Zifeng followed up with a formal proposal to the government of what this process could look like, and to get this started. Subsequently, there was an official meeting, and before this meeting, East researched how the battery cage was enacted in the European Union. So at that time, the European Union also did a policy review. They also looked into food safety. They did economic modeling. So we used that framework, and we proposed that framework at the first official meeting on this topic. And since, again, we were the most prepared and we had looked into this more than anyone else, this framework was then adopted as a model for how this could be done in Taiwan. And subsequently, this was all taking place last year, but the budgets for last year for the government departments were mainly already allocated. So something Li Ping worked really hard was to make sure that we could start this as soon as possible is working with the government agencies and being really creative to find existing government plans that had budgets that might be more flexible, and seeing where we can insert parts of this into these plans so that we can get started straight away. So through this, we were able to, for example, insert all of the questions about K3 systems and whatnot into the census for this year. And we're also able to get a head start on the food safety and biosecurity analysis. But there are still some parts of the policy review process that are not yet funded and that we'll be looking to fund in next year's budgets. We also solicited our own funding to be able to support a legal analysis by a legal academic. So this is one part of the policy review process that I mentioned previously, and that the government wishes to conduct, but they don't have the budget to right now. So we're starting on this ourselves on an independent basis. And our legal analysis might look different to what the government would produce, but if they're unable to find the funding in the future, this could be a reference for them. Or it also allows us, when the government does their legal analysis, to have a comparison. And the egg industry census that I mentioned will be completed by the end of this year. So that's coming up very quickly now. And that's currently where the process is up to right now. Our expectations for the policy review, we're not expecting a sudden ban of all battery cages. Currently, around 90% of hens in Taiwan are still living in cages. There are thousands of farmers that still use these systems. So I think any move on the government will be quite cautious and take quite a lot of time and policy work to achieve. So we don't anticipate that at the end of these studies and the policy review process that the government will immediately enact a ban. But through going through this process, one important thing is that it gives us critical insights into how a ban could be achieved. I think anytime you have more information, it gives you a lot of openings to use that data, use that insights to further your campaign. And yeah, we're really looking forward to what we can learn from this process that can help us push this forward. Another thing is that it really increases the stature of this issue. So the government's invested in doing this process. It shows that it's on the government's agenda, and that it is something the government is actively working on. So from that perspective, I think it really increases the visibility and the status of this problem, the cage issue. And finally, I think it really importantly gives us a foot in the door to put our campaign forward. So we don't envisage this being the end of the process, but yeah, if the government conducts this review and there's no subsequent actions, I think we'll certainly be able to point to this review and say that the government requires follow-up on this and really needs to keep working on this, not just let the report sit on the shelf. So thank you everyone for listening and for joining today. That was a brief overview of some of East's thoughts and ideas relating to policy work, as well as the policy review that's going on in Taiwan at the moment. And I'll just call Li-Ping over, and we'll have some time for any questions that people have.
Sure, thank you, Jonathan. So Li-Ping will join us. Right, thank you, Jonathan. I'm sure that all our audience feels the same. Hi, Li-Ping. Thanks for joining us today. I am impressed by the work that East has been doing in regard to battery cage ban. I personally would like to be able to do this in Thailand as well, but it seems like it's something very challenging. We don't even know how to start. So thank you so much for sharing the process and all the things that we have to know about policy today. So we already have some questions. If to all the participants here, if you have any questions at any point, just please feel free to submit it through the chat panel. So I'm just gonna read, starting from the first one. So we are just wondering if you have ever had any experience of the resistance from the vegan community in Taiwan, particularly from the abolitionist vegan, and how do you respond to the case?
就是有没有遭受 vegan 社区的反对，然后就是在推动事情这件事情上面，然后如何反应？
就有，但是其实因为谈的对象不一样嘛，就是我们要沟通的对象不一样，所以其实没有，不是台面上的反对，大部分都是在我们的议题下面的留言，所以其实不会对我们造成太大的负担，所以
跟政府沟通就是不会进行这个对话。对。Sure. So Li-Ping mentioned that we definitely do encounter this resistance, but I think a key point is that the targets of our campaigns are different. So if we're working with the government, so most of the resistance we encounter might be just leaving comments on our Facebook, people in the public that have some opposition. But when we're negotiating with the government, we're having those discussions, we're having those meetings, the target audience is very different. So because we're very much involved in this policy space, it might be putting out reports or working with academics, that level and that the arena is quite different. So we don't often encounter vegan opposition directly in our negotiations with the government or in that process.
Right, thank you. So the next question, in Thailand, the problem that we have is the lack of research regarding animal welfare and health risks that comes from intensive confinement of animals. I know that East is great at research, so would you be able to share with us what we could do to start making the research happen? Like, who should we partner with and what kind of skills do we need?
就研究而言，一般我们使用的方法就是会有一个专员固定在设定，然后一个就是自己找国际上的文献， 后询问他相关的内容跟意见，然后最后我们自己会去做相关的会诊。那另外一个就是会搭配调查，就是产业，所以通常我们做的研究就是国际的科学研究文献上，然后跟学者的沟通跟询问咨询，然后最后一个就是产业的访问，来验证这个文献的内容跟现代产业的现况，然后会诊完之后，大概就可以出现一个比较清楚的现况的一个内容，然后你就可以做整个政策的判断，这样。
So I think we have a similar thing in Taiwan in that most of the research isn't necessarily domestic. We also rely heavily on international research. So I think it's important to combine multiple, have a really multi-layered approach to make sure that you're still providing a really comprehensive information to stakeholders. So typically we'll have our own researchers who can compile to do desktop research and examine the literature. So this will be looking at international scientific reports or reports from international organizations, as well as if there's any domestic research, making sure that you find that as well. We'll also interview scholars directly in Taiwan. So that's another good way of getting a good domestic angle. So if there are any academics that might be an expert in this area or a similar area, an adjacent area, you can speak to them and they'll likely be a really good knowledge base and have really good insights on what the situation is in your country. And it might not necessarily be someone whose expertise is in animal welfare. Maybe you'll have to look at someone whose expertise is in animal health or something that's nearby if you don't have any experts directly on the area that you need. Another thing is doing investigations yourself. So you can do on-farm investigations, or you can do market investigations. You know, sometimes we even go into shops and look at all the egg prices and do an analysis of that. So you can, there are lots of ways that you can compile your own data about your domestic situation. And finally, consulting with the industry. So if you can speak with the industry, get their feedback, that's a really good way to test your ideas and make sure that they're accurate as well. So by combining all of those steps, you should be able to compile something that's really comprehensive and tailored to your local situation and turn that into a report or other document.
Right, thank you. I'm just going to skip over one question, but I will definitely come back because I think this question is more related to the one that you just answered. So do you have any, okay, just to give a little bit of background, in Thailand, so Sinergia Animal just released an investigation of egg farm like a month ago. And what we experienced is that the Department of Livestock is not happy with us at all. So after we released the investigation, the Department of Livestock released like a news stating that the battery cage that they saw in the documentary, like in the investigation footage, was from 30 years ago and it's ancient, but I personally know that it's not, it was captured last year. And the Department of Livestock thinks that we are making a false accusation and we were just doing this because we would like to blame them for animal cruelty. And each just state, like reiterated many times how important it is to be friendly with the industry and the government agency. But since this happened already in Thailand, would you have any recommendations of how Sinergia Animal can mend this broken bridge with them, and how can we become friends with the Department of Livestock? Sorry, Jonathan.
That's okay. I think I took a few notes.
Okay.
所以他们大概1个月前就是有，
我知道他们跑去拍嘛，然后官方他们发表，然后官方不同意。
然后官方出一个声明，说是30年前的事情，然后是假的，是造假的。
但是他们有他们的影片上都有时间吗？可以证实。第一个是证实这不是假的嘛。然后第二个就是，其实一开始 Easter 跟官方的关系也不好，就 就是一开始我们使用的方法，其实就议题而言，一开始其实跟官方一定都是比较对立的角度。对，那通常就对立之后，当你提供了足够的证据，然后让他无话可说的时候，还有一个就是要有地方势力，第三个势力就是比如说立法委员，然后跟你一起，那就可以形成对官方的压力。那有这个压力之后，他才会愿意坐下来跟你谈。那谈的时候就是比较要有技巧性的，跟他们陈述整个状况，然后可以用比较沟通的方法来进行。但是其实以前刚开始的时候，跟官方的角色其实并没有像现在这么好，其实也是很对立的。那这都是过程。对，那其实但是最重要的还是我们自己举证的东西一定要证明是正确的，而不是假的。这是很重要的一件事情。对。
So, Li Ping said to start with, obviously, it's really important to have the documentation and proof that you're not making any false allegations. So, if you have timestamps on your videos, things like that can prove when and where they were taken, that's obviously really important. But apart from that, East's relationship with the government at the start was also not really friendly and not at the level where it was now. So I think when you're pushing a new issue, it's not uncommon to start with a kind of confrontational approach because you're bringing new problems to light, and obviously the government won't be happy about that. So in situations like that, it is important to have all the evidence, do your research, make sure you have the upper hand, so that when you go to negotiate, really they've got nothing left to say. And also to bring in outside players and outside influences to force them to the table. So whatever that is, if that's legislators or a petition, public outrage, if you can harness that and force them to the table, then you might have the opportunity to change the direction of the conversation and make it into something that's more collaborative, and you're able to find common approaches. So I think it's common at the outset that you'll have these clashes and these conflicts, but if you have the skills in the negotiation, you should be able to, move on from that and move past that, and then bring the conversation to talking about the solutions. And yeah, one important thing to emphasize is that obviously this has been around for 20 years, so it helps, I think, for understanding each other's perspectives and having that trust over a long period of time as well. But everyone has to start somewhere.
Right, great answer. Thank you so much, Li Ping and Jonathan. Now to the next question. Do you have any recommendations as how a young organization can establish credibility, particularly to contribute to a policy-making process with the involved stakeholders?
就怎么样建立自己的信誉是吧？
对。
那其实就跟你刚才讲的差不多。其实第一个就是第一个就是要做好准备，就是不管是什么议题，比如说是淡季议题的话，第一个就是要做好准备。然后准备的话，就代表说第一个是要了解现况，现况就包含就是不管是官方或者是产业，就法律面、产业面，然后跟市场面，你可能都要了解。那还有就全球的趋势。然后接下来就是里面要提出的是缺乏什么，就是我们要的是什么。比如说这现况是这样，但是它缺的是什么？那它缺的这个东西有没有国际上的证据，来支持我们的这个说法？然后如果这些你都准备好了，那其实你就可以开始去跟他们沟通。那因为你有一个非常充分的研究的报告，那你在沟通的时候，人家就会看出你的专业性，而不是只是做一种情感上的诉求。就是一定要避免让人家把动保团体推向一个非科学、非研究证据的情感诉求的团体。那我觉得这样才能够产生对这个动保团体的专业性的建立。对，这样是这样。
So I think part of this is very similar to what we spoke about before in terms of doing the right preparation. So it's really important to, before you engage in this policy process, that you've got a really strong grasp of every facet of the problem. So that's looking at what the current context is in your country, what the relevant laws and regulations are that affect this, what the market situation is, what the global trend is, and really having a strong grasp on that, because you don't want to be surprised in a meeting, and as we spoke about before, you want to be the expert, because that gives you credibility in the conversation. And often in East, something that we do really commonly is, after identifying the issues, looking at what the international evidence is. Obviously, a lot of these issues have been done before overseas, and the government really likes to see case studies and precedents for how that issue has been resolved and addressed overseas as well, and what the evidence is behind that. And yeah, I think finally, just one key point is just that you want to make sure that your evidence is so sturdy and firm that it's impossible to dispute. If you have done that thorough preparation, if you have all of the facts, if you know more than all of the other people in the conversation, and you've all prepared all of that, then it's much harder for them to argue with you, and they have to treat you with some degree of respect. So we want to avoid a situation here where animal protection groups are just seen as doing emotional appeals and just putting sad videos up, but we want to show that we're also willing to engage with the science, engage with the facts, and engage in that manner that policymakers are used to working in.
还有就是提出一个可能的解决方法，让他们可以看到可以解决的，就还有一个解决的 solution 这样子，他们就不会觉得说好像只有问题，那是还有一个备案可以帮助他们，那这样才能开始。
And you also need to make sure that you've put forward a feasible proposal for how this can be resolved. So you can't just always be throwing problems at the government and not putting forward a really feasible and possible solution. That's really important to ensure that you're actually able to have a conversation about this, a constructive conversation.
Great. Wow, great answer. So next questions, and the last question from Diane. This is specific, but how do you deal with the egg pricing issue? Or if you don't propose anything regarding the pricing, how does your government deal with that? Because pricing is a big issue here, meaning Indonesia. Maybe we could give an insight to our government how it's done there, meaning in Taiwan.
我们有做蛋品的市场调查，对，就第一个是我们有做蛋品的市场调查，主要的通路，然后所以你可以掌握说在通路的所有蛋品上面的各种价钱，然后你了解了价钱之后，你就会知道这些蛋大概是什么样的蛋嘛，然后它跟比较catch free 的蛋的差异在哪里，然后在消费上有什么样的差异，就是对象群有什么样的差异，所以其实你就会可以针对价格这件事情去提出反驳。就是其实以台湾来讲，就是我们发觉菲翁斯的蛋跟 cage 的蛋，其实在价格上并没有差非常的多，尤其是在包装行销下，所以其实你就可以去提出价格上面的反驳这样子。
你说行销上是说比较高级的笼式的蛋，
对，就比如说他可能强调机能，就是他在饲料里面可能添加了什么，那他这样的蛋品，其他的价格其实也跟平时差不多，所以说就价格而言，我觉得还是要回到去了解市场的价格区间带，然后你可以知道说菲翁斯的价格大概落在哪里，那样的价格区间带背后代表的产业又是什么样的问题，就可以针对这点来提出反驳。
还有我们之前有看国际的，
对，还有一个就是去提欧盟它全面禁止鸽子笼之后的市场的变化，然后来提出说蛋的部分，如果未来普及的话，其实蛋价它可能会有的影响大概会是什么，就可以举例这样子。对，大概是这样。
So East actually has done like a market investigation before that was like based on collecting all of the prices at all of the different retailers and distributors. And through that, you can gain a lot of information like the price difference between cage and cage-free eggs. You can also do like a finer analysis. So through our analysis, we were able to show the price distribution and actually show that the price of cage-free eggs was not that much different to other more premium egg products. So for example, there might be eggs that are marketing themselves as having no antibiotics or vegetarian feed, or they've got some special function like added omega-3 or something like that. And those eggs are typically more expensive than the cheapest battery cages as well, battery cage eggs as well. So maybe you'll find that those egg products and cage-free egg products, it's actually not such a big gap at all, because they're likely to have the same target audience at the outset of people who are interested in natural or premium products or have a higher income. So those will probably be the people that you're starting with. And one other thing is that you can look for international examples. For example, in the EU, after they started their phase out of battery cages, look at what the market trends were and how the price changed in that market. And if I recall correctly, initially straight after the ban went into force, the price went up, but only for a year or two, and then it went down again. And the final price difference was not very far from what battery cages were. So it is that period of adjustment. But if you can show that the final price difference isn't actually such a huge gap after all, then that can be persuasive as well.
Thank you. So that would be it. I don't think there will be any questions, but if any of our participants would like to unmute yourself and ask the questions directly to Peng and Jonathan, this is the time. All right, if there's no more question, I am just going to close this webinar. So first of all, thank you so much, Peng, for joining during the Q&A session and give us all the great answers to our many and sometimes challenging questions. Thank you so much. And thank you, Jonathan, for translating and giving the presentation to us. Also, thanks to all the participants that come to this webinar and learn with us. So before we end this webinar, I just have a very short announcement to make. We have one more session left for this internal learning webinar series. It's going to happen today in a few hours. It's going to be about cage-free campaigns in South Korea from our friend from Korean Animal Welfare Society, or also known as KAWA. So if you're interested in learning how they do these things in South Korea, please join the webinar, and I'm hoping to see you there. Right, so before we go, I would like to invite everyone to unmute yourself and put your hands together for Peng and Jonathan. I think everyone should be able to do that because I allow everyone to speak already. All right, thank you so much for the claps. And have a great day, evening, afternoon, wherever you are in the world. All right, thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thank you, Witch, and thanks everyone for joining.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye.